Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. So it is time again for another monthly wrap-up. I actually read quite a few books in the month of April. I think 8 total, although several of those were audiobooks, because I feel like April was the month of audiobooks. And yeah, I'm gonna get started with the audiobooks that I listened to this month. So I've got them back here in this little cup because otherwise I would have forgotten. So I have like tiny little versions of some of them because I'm weird like that. So the first book that I read or listened to this month was Neil Gaiman's The Graveyard Book. I have to say that I loved The Graveyard Book far above Stardust, and I have not read anything else by Gaiman, but The Graveyard Book is my favorite. It's adorable. It's basically like a bunch of it felt like little short stories that all are like tied together about this boy who, when he is a baby, his family is murdered by a man named Jack, and he escapes into the graveyard, and he's like a toddler, like he's a baby, and so he's not doing it on purpose, and the ghosts of the graveyard take him in and give him the freedom of the graveyard, and it's sort of the different stories that arise from that, and it is so adorable, and I was frightened some of the time because I was like, oh no, what's gonna happen? But I really just thought it was really, really, really cute, and I loved it. I liked the way that it all sort of tied together in the end, so yes, that was fantastic, and one of the best things I read or listened to this month. And the audiobook is actually narrated by Neil Gaiman, so that was cool too. So the next one that I listened to was The One and Only Ivan by Katherine Applegate, and I had been wanting to pick up this book because, I don't know if you guys know, but Katherine Applegate wrote the Animorphs series under the name, I think, K.A. Applegate or something like that. She wrote the Animorphs series, and I was a big fan of Animorphs as a teenager, but that's a sidetrack, as always. The One and Only Ivan is a middle grade children's book, something like that, and it is so cute. It's about a gorilla named Ivan who is living in this like circus at a mall, and it's his story about, like, he's telling his story about, you know, how he got there, what it's like to live there, the people he interacts with, and the other animals in the zoo, or not zoo, in the circus that he interacts with, and especially this little elephant named Rosie. And Rosie and Ivan's relationship is cute, but oh my gosh, the dog is quite possibly the most adorable character in the whole thing, and I just loved him. At the moment, his name is escaping me, which makes me sad, but he was fantastic, and I love Bob. His name is Bob. I loved Bob the dog. Adorable. So it was about that time that I realized that I could kill 2 birds with 1 stone and listen to audiobooks that I had on my physical TBR that I had been meaning to get to but just had not had the time or just kept putting off for one reason or another. And so the first one I picked up is a book that I have had for quite a while, and that is Without You, which is Anthony Rapp's memoir. And Anthony Rapp he played Mark in the original Broadway cast of Rent, and then he also reprised his role in the movie. So if you ever are a Rent fan, I don't know why I can't speak. If you are a Rent fan, then you probably know who Anthony Rapp is. And I've actually met him. He came to my university when he was on his book tour, and so my book is actually, if I can get it to the right page, is actually signed by him. So that's pretty cool, and he was hilarious. I'm actually going to insert a really embarrassing picture because I just have to. He was such a good sport with us. We asked him if he would do the Tango Maureen with us, and he totally did, and he looks so serious, and we look embarrassed and ashamed, and I feel like we were all of those things, but this picture is priceless, and it makes me smile. So back to the book, anyways. I have mixed feelings about this. I really enjoyed all the parts that had to do with Rent because it was really interesting to hear it from the perspective of someone who was there from the very beginning. And I made the mistake of listening to the chapter about Jonathan when I was on the way to work, and so like I got to work and I was crying because, again, if you know anything about the history of Rent, its creator, Jonathan, died right before it was actually going to be shown. They had like a dress rehearsal, and it was supposed to have its first preview, and he died the night of the dress rehearsal, so he really never got to see its success. And I cried like a baby because it's just so sad, and Jonathan's legacy is so fantastic. And so that stuff was really interesting. There were things about this book that I didn't like. I found a lot of times that Anthony was not a person that I would get along with. He was somebody that seemed very selfish and easily angered and things like that. And it's funny because having met him, he doesn't seem like the kind of person that he portrays himself as in the book. And I don't know, I mean, it's a lot of him growing, him dealing with his mom's cancer and her eventual passing away, and dealing with a lot of bad relationships. But it's a great picture, I will say, of what someone goes through who is queer and whose parents don't necessarily agree with it. And I thought that that was really honest and well done and well spoken, and something that I think that a lot of people can relate to. And so that aspect of the book I really liked. I just found that Anthony wasn't the most likable person, which is a shame because I liked him when I met him. I don't know. And the last book that I listened to as an audiobook was The Ghost Bride, and this one hasn't necessarily been on my shelf all that long. I just saw that it was available on audiobook and was like, yep, gonna do that one next, because I've been wanting to read it. I just haven't found the time, and I'm glad that I did listen to it on audiobook, because the names in this would have given me a lot of trouble. They are traditional Chinese names, and I am terrible with Chinese names. I'm really bad with them. So I was glad to be able to hear them from somebody who speaks the language, and it also, I felt like, gave it such an even more magical quality than the book has already, because it's definitely a very beautiful, otherworldly book. The premise is this wealthy family has a son that died, and they want to marry their dead son off to her, and she would be a ghost bride. And it's sort of that part is at first is like the bulk of the first part of it, because I think it's 4 parts. And then something happens, and we are introduced to this other sort of worldly situation, and we get to, interact with spirits, and we get to see into what the author sort of imagines. And she did admit that some of it she fabricated for her own purposes for the book, but sort of a picture of what Chinese afterlife would look like. And that was so fascinating and beautifully written, and I just thought the story was fantastic, suspenseful, and I just really, really enjoyed this. I would definitely recommend it. Alright, so now for the book that almost put me into a reading slump, and I feel so bad saying that, but I had a lot of trouble with this book, and I made no secret about it either, and that was Well of Ascension by Brandon Sanderson. I had heard people say it was slow, and I was hoping that maybe it wouldn't be, or that I would be okay with the pace. But honestly, the first 500 pages of this 700 and something page book is straight bureaucracy. Like, to me, nothing really interesting happened. It was basically bureaucracy and Vin and Eland and Zane whining. And Vin drove me crazy in this book. Eland annoyed me in this book. Basically, I wanted to strangle Zane from the moment he was introduced, and it wasn't that I didn't enjoy this book, because I still like the world, and I still like the magic system, and most of the characters I still enjoy, and by the end of the book, those issues that were plaguing them that really made them annoying characters sort of worked their way out, but I don't know. I just thought that this book could have been much, much shorter, and I think I would have enjoyed it more, and I think that that's sort of a prevailing opinion. But I still did enjoy it, and The ending was crazy, and I am looking forward to finding out how this ends in the third installment, though I have been 19 or 20 pages into that installment for about 3 weeks, something like that. So I don't foresee finishing Hero of Ages in the month of May, but we'll see. And then another book that I picked up that was on my physical TBR that I had just had for a while and hadn't really made the effort to read was a nonfiction book called The White Rose, and this is about the White Rose Society, and more specifically it's about Hans and Sophie Scholl, who are basically like the central characters in the White Rose Society. And the White Rose Society was a group of students, for the most part, in Nazi Germany at the University of Munich, who were creating these pamphlets and sort of doing civil disobedience to fight against the Nazi regime. And this was really interesting. The first third of the book is their sister, because it's told by their sister Inga. And the first third of the book was their sister sort of telling how they were brought up, you know, why they believe the things they do, and about their family life. And then sort of a little bit about their time in Munich and about their activity in the White Rose Society. But then it goes on to the second section, which is all of the leaflets that they wrote and distributed. And those were fascinating to read, because when you think about them in the context of Nazi Germany, it was such an incredibly brave act, and it's just, you know, they were saying the kinds of things that so many people were thinking, but nobody was brave enough to say because the consequences were so dire, which is obvious because if you are at all familiar with Hans and Sophie Scholl, they were both beheaded and in a very quick trial after they were apprehended, putting out the pamphlets. And so their story is something that's really interesting to me, and I actually bought this when I was in Munich and I went to the museum that's at the University of Munich. The last third of this book is all of the court documents, and that was a little bit hard to slog through, but also interesting because you see how the Nazi government was sort of justifying what they were doing and sort of like how they were categorizing these things that they did. And it was crazy to hear, you know, the charges against these, you know, college age kids basically. And it was fascinating. And if you are at all interested in World War II history, in the history of Nazi Germany or the resistance or anything like that, this is something that I would definitely recommend. So then Dewey's 24-hour readathon rolled around, and I did very little participation in that. I was hoping to do more, but we just had a lot of things going on, which has been the case pretty much every time it's rolled around. I haven't really been able to participate. So the only thing that I really finished that day was a graphic novel, and I don't read a ton of graphic novels. In fact, this is probably one of the first ones that I have actually picked up, and I just thought the name was funny, and I heard somebody say that it had really good, like, girl power friendships, which is something that we don't see a lot in books, which is sad to say. But I picked it up. It's called Lumberjanes, and it's freaking adorable. It's basically like Gravity Falls meets like a girls' camp, and it's hilarious. I mean, I don't know if you know what Gravity Falls is. It's a show on Disney Channel or Disney XD, one of those, but it's like weird things happen, and that's basically what this was. It was like a bunch of girls at a camp, like a summer camp, called the Lumberjanes, and they somehow get involved in this crazy thing that's happening that's sort of like supernatural, and they're like crime fighting and using, each of them have special, like, what they're better at and things like that, and they work together and they have superpower friendship, or I can't remember what it is they say all the time, but it was really cute and I loved it, and I'm gonna buy the physical copy. I actually read this on my iPad mini through the Scribd app because they have ebooks as well as audiobooks, and they have some graphic novels. Not a huge selection of graphic novels, but that was one of them. So I'm going to end up buying that because it's just super cute, and I'm looking forward to the second volume coming out because adorable, just adorable. Alright, and the last thing that I read this month I actually flew through, and that is The Winter's Curse by Marie Rakowski, and this is awesome. Like, it lives up to the hype that it had, or it has. I heard about this on Sam's channel from Thoughts on Tomes, and she talked so highly of it that I was like, oh, I want to read that. And then I saw it at my used bookstore, snapped it up, had to read it. So it's about a girl named Kestrel, and she is the daughter of the general of the Valorian or Valorian people, and they basically stole their land from the Hernani. So many things to try to pronounce. And so they, like, it's like the Valorians are the conquerors and the Hernani are now their slaves, and she ends up buying a slave at the market and, like, doesn't even know why she did it, but, you know, obviously a sort of relationship develops, and it was interesting because I felt like there was no rush. They weren't rushed in the way that the relationship developed, and I thought that she was very fascinating, and she's a strong female character, which I loved, and I loved that she was not afraid to provoke people even if they were stronger than her, and she just was such a great strategic mind, and I love that. I loved watching her figure out situations and watching her, you know, basically one-up other people because she just thinks faster than them and she sees things differently, and I just thought that was a really great aspect of this book. And I am definitely looking forward to reading the second one. I have actually already started it. I'm like 50 pages in, so I'm hoping to fly through that one too. And it will definitely be in my May wrap-up. Alright, so those were the books that I read and listened to in the month of April. I will probably continue the trend of listening to quite a few audiobooks because I have a long drive to work and it just makes sense. It makes the drive so much better. Alright, well, I hope you guys are having a wonderful day, and I would love to hear what your favorite book that you read in the month of April was, and I will see you again next week. Bye!